Baldur's Gate 3 is an RPG made by Larian Studio. Having finished Divinity 2 a couple of times, I decided to get Baldur's Gate and play it in co-op with a friend of mine. We went in blind, knowing very little of the combat system or the world. 100 hours of gameplay later, we finished our first run. It's not a perfect game, but it's fun and full of content. Baldur's Gate 3 is a turn-based role-playing game set in the Dungeons & Dragons universe. The plot begins when your characters and a bunch of other NPCs get abducted by Illithids, basically Cthulhu people, and infected with a parasite that's meant to turn other creatures into fellow tentacles enjoyers. But for whatever reason, the parasites aren't working as expected.
I've not grown any tentacles yet, thank Baldrin.
It might have something to do with this mysterious artifact that won't stop following you around. It soon turns out that the Illithid incursions are connected to more than just a reproductive cycle, and I'd leave it at that for now. The first thing you do after getting infected is choosing your character. There's 11 races and 12 classes, with many sub-races, subclasses, and more class options opening up as you level your character. If you want to, you can also play as one of the companion NPCs, but then you wouldn't be able to choose your penis. My buddy went for a Dragonborn Barbarian. Lots of damage and high strength. Sometimes it was just as valid to pick up enemies and throw them in chasms. I went for a Gnome Bard, a mix of utility spells plus high charisma for out-of-combat interactions, and of course the ability to play my loot for money like a homeless person. It was funny to see the dialogue camera cutting everybody else off frame when it focused on my short ass. What's neat is that occasionally having a silver tongue might allow you to just skip boss fights or avoid conflicts.
A pacifist? In Baldur's Gate?
Not always.
Cock.
But I felt bad for every fight we ended up skipping. The combat system is just so good.
Okay.
You have action points which you can spend on a variety of things, and you can even gain more with abilities or potions. Attack a guy and it's an attack versus armor calculation, but if you can disable or debuff your target, you might have advantage, meaning that you roll twice and keep the best result. Or maybe you're against a tough enemy and what you need is to give them disadvantage against you. Or you could just turn them into a ship. But my favorite part is the physics system. Please, my soon-to-be hostile NPCs, gather for a performance. I call this one the Song of Chasm. Oh, that's a pretty good song. Wow, that's a good song. Just know that the enemy can also do it. Another thing I love is just how many fights there are and how much they're varied, giving you reason to shuffle your party members to suit the encounter. Speaking of, your companions are a nice bunch. There's a good variation of roles and each has a personal quest with different possible outcomes. They're also romanceable. In this playthrough I went for Lae'zel, the zealous Gintiaki fighter. You might think that people in this universe have no standard, and you'd be right. But let's be fair, who could resist that cowboy hat? And how sweet was it to see love blossom between these two?
Are you worthy? There is only one way for you to prove it. We fight. I test you in battle.
What a waifu. Most so-called tradwives today can't even hold a halberd, let alone attack 3 times per action with it. Here's some other companions you get. Gale is a wizard prodigy with a close connection to the goddess of magic. Shadowheart is a cleric sworn to serve the goddess of darkness, no points for guessing how that goes. Will is a warlock. That means his powers are conditionally granted by a powerful being. In this case, it's a devil called Mizora. She actually rewards him for being obedient or horribly punishes him if he isn't. Dear lord, she's making him more Your character might also have a similar dynamic depending on your class. For example, a paladin has to live by a code of conduct if he wants to retain his divine favor. Plot-wise, without spoiling anything, it manages to stay engaging throughout. Information about the true nature of your parasite is drip-fed to you by actors who'd rather keep you in the dark about everything. Too bad for them that our party was basically a sentient pile of violence. and a battered husband. So any attempt to buy us eventually resulted in a fight. Even the audacity of having a locked door was enough to cause a breaking and entering. As it turns out, that's precisely what the devs want you to do sometimes. Segue into complaining. First of all, as expected from a game this long, the final act ended up being the weakest, at least for me. It's fine narratively, it just runs way worse and has a couple of annoying scavenger hunt quests. Its city setting is also a far cry from the enemy-packed wild areas you just finished. The game is also a little buggy at times. Oh no. An example is Polar Mastery. It's supposed to give you an opportunity attack when enemies come close, but it also gives you the option to let polar musing enemies attack you when you come into their range. Other times the game won't let you jump, or actions will take a couple of seconds to have an effect for some reason. But all in all, there was no game-breaking bug, or at least nothing that a quick load didn't fix. One annoying thing is not being able to open pouches when it isn't your turn. It's only a problem in co-op, but it's definitely unintended because you can move things that are out of pouches without any issue. Keeping your inventory tidy is such a hassle. I would also love being able to change the equipment of the companions you left at camp without having to get them to join your active party. By the way, there's a different campsite for every area you're in. Yeah, this game has a lot of attention to detail. Not only for roleplay, as you'll see custom dialogue options everywhere it makes sense, but also graphically, with characters getting bruised at low health and sweaty when next to lava. Not everything looks great up close, but in general the visuals are good looking, with nice models, smooth animations, and the occasional neat landscape when the camera isn't fighting you. We're basically at the end of the review, and I wanna talk some more about combat, but this time showing some encounters to better illustrate my points, so if you want to go in totally blind, that's your spoiler warning. Between unique gear, scrolls, grenades, and the sheer variety of builds you can go for, there are so many ways to approach combat. Once I finished my co-op campaign, I immediately started another game with a different class. I also switched the class of some companions to great effect. There's this encounter in chapter 1 with a tanky enemy which burrows and runs away. It's supposed to be a multi-stage encounter, chasing this beast and hunting it down as it ambushes your party over and over. But this time I had a storm sorcerer, a wet target, potions of speed and no bard to weigh me down, so I managed to kill it in the first turn. There's nothing I love more than a meaty combat system like this one. There's a ton of possible party combinations, and when you consider multiclassing, there's almost infinite ways to build a character. But combat isn't only about sheer DPS, you also have to approach things intelligently.
Yeah, that was not a good idea.
Pretty often there will be fights where the enemy is trying to ambush you. If you see it coming, you can sneak around and counter-ambush them. Sometimes you also have to fight the environment. In chapter 2 there's this big area which has been taken over by a shadow curse. If you don't stay in the light, you just die. So you need to bring torches, which take up your main weapon slot, or other magical ways to produce light. There's a whole quest about finding a way to breach the darkest part of the shadow curse, which I just think it's neat as hell. And finally, even traversing the world is satisfying. Specifically stuff like being on top of a cliff, popping a scroll of Featherfall and dropping down into unknown territory. It's not just the combat or the roleplay that's great, this game is good at being an adventure. So, Baldur's Gate 3. If you like turn-based combat, it's an easy recommendation as long as you're not hoping for a quick experience. It's a solid game, thick with content, with tons of different classes to try out in different playthroughs. I hope they'll add GM mode from Divinity, and also some shorter mini campaigns wouldn't be bad either. It's a little buggy, but nothing game breaking. It's got hundreds of hours worth of content, and in my opinion the simple fact that a full price game launched in a playable state and without microtransactions or paywalled content is something worth celebrating. That's all, thanks for watching.
I'll rip your spine out your asshole! I'll use your blood to spice my stew! I'll keep you alive until I've sucked the marrow from your bones! And then I'll bring you back and do it all over again!
Gnorri.